How every great general died. Hannibal Barca. Hannibal Barca had one of the most extraordinary military careers in history, but his end was as dramatic as his life. His death marked the end of one of the greatest military minds in ancient history. Hannibal, with his stunning victories against Rome during the Second Punic War, especially at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, struck fear into the Roman Republic through his tactical brilliance. In 202 BC, Hannibal was defeated at the Battle of Zama by Scipio Africanus. In 195 BC, he fled Carthage and sought refuge with King Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, but his efforts to resist Rome failed after Antiochus' defeat at the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC. Hannibal then took refuge in Bithynia under King Crassus I, but as political pressure from Rome grew, Crassus handed him over to the Romans. When Hannibal was informed that the king's soldiers were in the vestibule, he tried to escape through a postern gate which afforded the most secret means of exit. He found that this too was closely watched and the guards were posted all around the place. To avoid capture and humiliation of being paraded in a Roman victory parade, Hannibal decided to defeat his honor himself. Hannibal said, "Let us ease the Romans of the continual dread and care, who think it long and tedious to await the death of a hated old man," and then drank poison, which he may have kept hidden under a gem on a ring. Such was the close of Hannibal's life. General Crassus. Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Roman history, met a brutal and ignoble end, marking a stark contrast of his extraordinary career. Crassus was a member of the first triumvirate alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey, using his vast wealth to secure political power and military success. By 53 BC, at the age of 62, Crassus had already gained fame for his defeat of the Spartacus slave rebellion, but his eager to match the military success of Caesar and Pompey, he set his sights on the Parthian Empire. At the time, the Parthians were a powerful force in the region. The Crassus underestimated their might. Crassus led an army of approximately 40,000 Roman soldiers into battle against Parthian force led by General Serena. Though the Parthian army was smaller, it was highly skilled, particularly with its cavalry. The Parthian cataphracts, heavily armored cavalry, proved decisive, overwhelming the Roman forces. Despite Crassus' desperate attempt to retreat, his son Publius was killed in the fighting, and Crassus himself was eventually surrounded by the Parthian forces. Crassus was killed by the Parthian general Serena, who reportedly poured molten gold down Crassus' throat as a form of mockery, symbolizing Crassus' greed. Crassus' death not only marked the end of the first triumvirate, but also shifted the balance of power in Rome. Oda Nobunaga. Oda Nobunaga, the warlord who laid the foundations for the unification of Japan, met a violent and tragic end at the hand of his closest allies. Nobunaga was known for his ruthless efficiency and innovative military tactics, including the strategic use of firearms. Many of his allies and generals, including Akechi Mitsuhide, were growing increasingly delusioned and resentful of his autocratic leadership. The final straw may have been Nobunaga's disregard of Mitsuhide's suggestions and strategies during key military campaigns, which fueled his growing anger. On June 21, 1582, Oda Nobunaga was staying at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto to rest before continuing his campaign. Nobunaga has relaxed his visual vigilance, believing he was safe within his own domain. Mitsuhide, leading a force of several thousand soldiers, surrounded Honnoji Temple early in the morning. Nobunaga's forces at the temple were small, and he found himself trapped by Mitsuhide's surprise attack. Faced with imminent capture or death, Nobunaga chose the traditional samurai death, seppuku, or ritual suicide. This decision was meant to preserve his honor and avoid the shame of being captured or killed in battle. With a sword in his hand, Nobunaga committed seppuku in the inner chambers of Honnoji Temple. The assassination of Oda Nobunaga by Akechi Mitsuhide remains one of the most significant betrayals in Japanese history. General Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor who captured much of Europe and reshaped the continent's political landscape, met his end far from the battlefields that made him a legend. In 1804, he declared himself Emperor of France and embarked on a series of military campaigns known as the Napoleonic Wars, which would see his dominance over much of Europe. However, after a disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812, Napoleon's empire began to crumble. In 1814, he was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the island of Elba. He briefly returned to power in 1815 during the 100 Days. After his catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, Napoleon was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, a British-controlled territory in South Atlantic Ocean. Napoleon's health began to deteriorate shortly after his arrival on St. Helena. The first sign of illness appeared around 1817, when Napoleon began experiencing stomach pains, digestive issues, and general weakness. Over time, Napoleon's health declined rapidly, and he became bedridden. Napoleon died on May 5, 1821 at the age of 51. Some researchers believe Napoleon was slowly poisoned with arsenic rather than dying from stomach cancer. However, others suggest the toxin came from the paint on the walls of his residence, which contained green arsenic, a common wallpaper dye at the time. His body was embalmed and initially buried on St. Helena. In 1840, his remains were exhumed and transported to France. General Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, one of the most renowned military leaders in history, met a dramatic and violent end at the hands of his closest allies. In 49 BC, Caesar is one of Rome's most powerful figures. However, his increasing power alarmed many of the Roman Senate and formed a conspiracy to assassinate him. On March 1544 BC, famously known as the Idols of March, Caesar was scheduled to attend a Senate meeting in the theater of Pompey. As he entered the Senate chamber, he was surrounded by a group of conspirators, including Brutus, a former friend and possibly even his illegitimate son with a woman named Servilia, and Cassius, a longtime critic of his rule. Caesar initially tried to defend himself, but as the conspirators closed in, he was overwhelmed. When Brutus, whom Caesar trusted deeply, delivered the fatal blow, legend has it that Caesar, shocked by the betrayal, uttered the famous word, "Et tu, Brute?" meaning, "And you, Brutus?" These words, whether they were actually spoken or not, have come to symbolize the ultimate act of betrayal. Caesar was stabbed 23 times in total by the conspirators. General Alexander the Great. The death of General Alexander the Great in 323 BC at the age of 32 remains one of the most debated and mysterious events in history. After a relentless campaign that stretched from Greece to India, his empire stretched across continents. However, in the spring of 323 BC, just after his return to Babylon, the young conqueror fell ill. For several days, Alexander suffered from a fever, experienced a rapid onset of fever, chills, and severe abdominal pain. Some ancient sources speculate that Alexander was poisoned by his political rivals or enemies. Modern historians believe he may have died from a natural illness such as a malaria or typhoid fever, both common in the region. During his final days, Alexander was surrounded by his generals, his mother Olympias, and his wife Roxana. As his death grew imminent, he was asked who should succeed him. His cryptic response, "The strongest," left the empire's future uncertain. General Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tokugawa Ieyasu, one of the most influential figures in Japan history, met his end in a way that seemed almost anticlimactic for a man who had survived so many battles and political intrigues. After a long life of military triumphs, including his decisive victory at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, Ieyasu succeeded in unifying Japan, establishing the Tokugawa shogunate that would rule for over 2 centuries. As his health worsened in his later years, Ieyasu became more frail. On June 1, 1616, the final straw came after a lavish tempura meal consisting of fried fish, a dish greatly enjoyed. However, the rich, indulgent meal, combined with his already fragile health, seemed to accelerate his decline. Soon after, Ieyasu's health rapidly deteriorated, and despite efforts to manage his condition, he passed away in Sunpu. His son, Tokugawa Hidetada, quickly ascended to the position of shogun, ensuring the continuity of the Tokugawa regime. King Leonidas I. Leonidas, one of the most legendary figures in Greek history, met his end in a dramatic and heroic fashion that has inspired generations. As king of Sparta, Leonidas led a small force of 300 Spartans, supported by around 7,000 Greek soldiers from various city-states, despite being vastly outnumbered by the Persians, who may have had 100,000 to 200,000 troops. The narrow pass of Thermopylae favored the Greeks. Their heavy armor and disciplined phalanx formation allowed them to inflict heavy casualties on the Persian forces, whose cavalry and archers were ineffective. On the third day, a Greek traitor, Ephialtes, revealed a secret mountain path to the Persians, allowing them to encircle the Greeks. Realizing defeat was imminent, Leonidas chose to stay behind with his 300 Spartans and 700 Thespians to cover the retreat of the others. Surrounded by the Persian army, Leonidas and his men fought bravely, using their phalanx formation and close combat skills to take down hundreds of Persians. Leonidas led from the front, wielding his Cephas sword with unwavering resolve. Finally, Leonidas was struck down, though the exact manner of his death is debated. Some say he was killed by Persian archers, others that he fell in hand-to-hand combat with Circe's elite guards. His body was later desecrated by the Persians, but his warriors fought to retrieve his remains, giving him an honorable burial. To this day, the story of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans is remembered as one of the greatest acts of valor in military history.